let's move on to our second panel. We've learned about various approaches to preventing anti-Semitism. So let's take a look at how that actually plays out when it comes to protecting Jews on the street. And unfortunately, for cities and communities around the world, that means security and law enforcement. Joining us to weigh in is another group of experts to share their insights on exactly that. United States Senator for Nevada, co-founder and co-chair of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, Jackie Rosen; Heidi Harman, mayor of San Luis Obispo, California; president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, Eric Fingerhut; and superintendent of community services for the York Regional Police in Canada, Ricky Verapin. Also with us, CEO of the Secure Community Network, Michael Masters. But first, let me turn it over for some opening remarks to Senator Rosen.
Hello, I'm Senator Jackie Rosen, and I'm honored to serve as the third Jewish woman in the Senate and the first former synagogue president in Congress. I'm also the co-founder and co-chair of the Senate's Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. I want to thank all the mayors that have joined together today for this important discussion. Now is a critical time for Jewish Americans and for Jews across the globe. I don't need to tell you that all over the world, and even here in the United States, no issue threatens the Jewish community more than the alarming rise of anti-Semitism and violent extremism. We've seen incidents of anti-Semitic hate and extremist violence in places like Poway and Pittsburgh, and in cities and towns everywhere in between, even here at our own U.S. Capitol. In Europe, we've seen cemeteries desecrated and synagogues violently attacked, hearkening back to the 1930s. This hate is unacceptable, and it's something we must come together to confront head-on. According to the FBI, anti-Semitic hate crimes rose by 14% in 2019 and constituted 62% of all incidents based on religion. Especially now, we have a responsibility to our neighbors, to our friends, to our community, and to our children to work to prevent anti-Semitism and extremist violence before it starts. That's why I launched the first ever Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, to educate, to empower, and to empower communities to fight back against hate. And one way we can fight back is by ensuring that communities have the resources they need to monitor, track, and deter acts of bigotry and violence. One study shows that over the last 5 years, 76% of Jews who experienced an anti-Semitic attack or remark did not report it. It's for this reason that last Congress I co-sponsored the No Hate Act. This legislation will help close gaps in hate crime reporting and strengthen our response nationally and locally. You have my word that I will continue to push for passage of the No Hate Act, and I look forward to its reintroduction this Congress. In the Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, we've used our voices and our resources to engage foreign governments, calling out anti-Semitism when it rears its ugly head, and also praising our partners when they take positive steps to better identify and address anti-Semitism, like adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition. Know that you have an ally and a partner in our shared fight against anti-Semitism and extremism. Together, I know we can combat hate and help make this world a better place to live for ourselves, for our children, and for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen, for your leadership in bipartisan efforts, keyword there, bipartisan, to defeat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred. And let's go from that straight to our second panel and to Michael Masters from the Secure Community Network. As you see it, how much of a role can really and should local authorities play in protecting their own religious minority communities, including Jews, of course?
First of all, it's a pleasure to join you and with the panel, some friends and colleagues. The short answer is that local authorities can and they should play a role in protecting religious minority communities, including the Jewish one. First, because the current environment demands it, and second, because it makes good sense. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, just as some context, hate crime incidents in our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and temples increased by roughly 35% over the last 5 years. And of course, the statistics that the senator just mentioned portend the same trends. One of the distinguishing characteristics with the American Jewish community has been the strong relationship with federal, state, and local authorities. The reality is that we all have to work together at all levels and between faiths. One thing that we stress, working very closely with the Jewish federations in North America, Eric Fingerhut, who's here as the president and CEO, is that much of this begins at the local level. Local communities have to be empowered to take ownership, and that comes in concert with local government. How can they do that? Build a community of trust, like Mayor Harmon has done with her PACT program, create an interfaith security advisory council, ensure positive, regular interaction with law enforcement, whether that's then stopping in for a Shabbat service, an Eid al-Fitr dinner, and then do as the senator mentioned, make sure that we're reporting and have strong mechanisms to report. We estimate that, roughly 250,000 hate crimes in the United States, only about 7,000 of those are reported. Over 86% of law enforcement agencies report no hate crimes in the United States. So this is an area where local government can really step in and make a difference.
Mentioned Mayor Harmon, so let me jump there and tell us about the recent vandalism incident you had at an AEPI fraternity house in your city, and how did you actually work with law enforcement to respond to it? If you could just quickly unmute, we can't hear you quite yet. All right, well, we'll give you 1 second to unmute. I'll just jump from there to Superintendent Verapin.
There we go. Sorry,
we got
sorry
you.
about that. It wasn't letting me unmute. There we go. Thank you so much. And
Sure.
thank you so much for having me on this panel today. So unfortunately, a Jewish fraternity here in my community of San Luis Obispo, California, on the Cal Poly campus was vandalized with swastikas and other anti-Semitic graffiti. And this happened also on Shabbat. Whether the person understood that or not is unclear. But the case was assigned the day after the incident was reported. And we have several other things that we've done here in this particular case, but that we do in general when these types of things occur. Detectives canvassed the area for surveillance cameras on 2 separate occasions, and several cameras were located, but unfortunately no evidence was obtained from those cameras. We collaborated with campus police regarding this vandalism and other acts of this nature in the past as well. We also, in this case, consulted with the FBI Hate Crime Task Force regarding other possible related incidents to other Jewish fraternities, just to see if this was a part of a bigger attack, and it did not appear to be the case at that time. The president of the fraternity and other members of the fraternity did not feel like they were at physical risk, and did return to their fraternity. We did coordinate also with the Anti-Defamation League, drafted a press release, offered a $2,500 reward for any information leading to an arrest and conviction. Unfortunately, no leads have developed since this happened. The swastika at the fraternity was the only hate speech that was located. And what we do in the city, generally speaking, is that we document every hate activity in the city, as compared to some cities where speech that may not be per se legally a hate crime, they may not document that, but we document anything that gets close to that. And last year we had documented 15 cases of this type of thing happening in our community. What's really great about the positive side of this is that the students responded so beautifully just went straight to solutions. So the Jewish fraternity and others on campus raised over $30,000 to support the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, and to create a Jewish festival of learning on campus. So that's an upcoming event that they'll be creating, really feeling like this was a lack of understanding and education. And since it is an educational facility, wanting to bring that education piece. They also brought in an Israeli artist to do some pro-peace graffiti on the fraternity. And so We haven't seen any other events like this since that time.
Well, it's interesting, and I think it might be surprising to those who are not mayors that might be listening that just documenting the actual crimes or those incidents is a really big step in actually dealing with them, and it's not something to be taken for granted. I want to jump from there to Mr. Fingerhut. Let's talk for a moment about how Jewish federations across the United States have worked with mayors and their teams in actually strengthening security, of course, not just for the Jewish community, but for other faiths.
Yeah, thank you, Nuri. It's great to be here. And I know she's not with us anymore, but I want to acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of Senator Rosen on leading on anti-Semitism in the U.S. Senate. Well, as Michael Masters mentioned, and of course our close partners at the Secure Community Network, the security of a community is really a partnership between local and in the U.S. state, and of course the national authorities. But the rubber meets the road in the local community, as the mayor and the superintendent on this panel know. And so for Jewish federations, having a focused community security initiative in every single Jewish community, regardless of size, is our primary goal. These community security initiatives consist of professional leadership on the ground and resources to train and organize all of the Jewish communal institutions. That training and those professionals are recruited and trained in part by our partners at the Secure Community Network. The funds are raised in a partnership with local federations, almost always on the lead, but also with additional national support. All of this comes under the umbrella of livesecure.org. You can find the information at livesecure.org. There are about 45 community security initiatives already underway in our federation communities. Now, each of them is there to complement, not to replace or be separate from the local law enforcement efforts. And in building our relationships with local law enforcement in each community, our goal is to work with them and together with all the other communities of faith and ethnic communities so that we have one integrated and seamless effort. But it is true, as Michael pointed out with the statistics and Senator Rosen, that part of our job in every Jewish community with every federation community security initiative is to help sensitize local law enforcement to the fact that the Jewish community, even if it appears to be an affluent and safe community on the surface, is disproportionately the target of hate crimes. And so our essential partnership with local law enforcement and with all the other communities of faith to build out that secure community across each of our Jewish communities in North America is an essential part of our work.
Well, I think it'll be really interesting then to hear from the flip side, from the view of law enforcement on how they're dealing with everything. Superintendent Verapin, for police, what is the biggest challenge in securing the Jewish community in your experience? And how do you actually determine, and this is tough, if a crime is in fact anti-Semitic?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to have us join you here from Ontario, Canada, and York Region. So perhaps I could just start off with a little bit of context. The regional municipality of York that we serve, we see it as a microcosm of the world with roughly 1.2 million expressions of human diversity. And amongst that, roughly approximately 25,000 members of Jewish heritage and ancestry living in our region. Along with that, a number of synagogues and heritage schools and other institutions specific to the Jewish community. Now, the motto of York Regional Police is deeds speak, which is translated to mean actions speak louder than words. So actions better speak louder than all the words that we have. In terms of some of the challenges in working with our Jewish community and securing the Jewish community, complacency, I think, is perhaps number one. Always being on alert, recognizing situational awareness, understanding the impact of global events locally, and really policing with a global mindset. So it calls for collective vigilance. We see it as an opportunity to engage with communities, to police with a global mindset, recognizing that we need to be aware of trends and patterns that are on the horizon, pay close attention to regional conflicts, civil wars, racial, ethnic tensions around the world, ethno-cultural conflicts, and all those types of things that have tremendous impacts on communities locally within our within our region. In addition to that, just establishing public trust and confidence in policing. And one of the ways that we engage in that through York Regional Police is through extensive community engagement in working with communities, recognizing that there really is no one-size-fits-all approach to any particular community, because it's important to understand cultural context, it's important to understand history, it's important to understand many of the nuances and factors that really define authentic identities and authentic human population groups within our communities. So safety and security is fundamental for everything that we do. In terms of maintaining open lines of communication, critically important. Our philosophy is that a time of a crisis is not the time to be exchanging business cards. So the importance of building those relationships prior to any type of crisis is critically important for us at York Regional Police. We have a strategy called policing. It's called policing with a global mindset. And really, again, it's looking at the world and trying to figure out, all the things that are happening around the world, but most importantly, how do we distill that into safety and security concerns for communities right within York region. Project Ready is a program that we have that really incorporates that global mindset and asks our officers and literally trains our officers towards utilizing a global mindset approach when working within communities. A lot of our work is about strengthening community partnerships within the communities. We distinguish between hate crime and hate incidents, because if hate crime represents the tip of the iceberg, for example, anti-Semitic hate crime representing the tip of the iceberg, then what lies beneath the surface are most likely anti-Semitic incidents. And we need to pay attention to that, because it gives you a better understanding of the climate of the community and the nature of things that may not have hit the threshold of criminality as yet. And then also we talk about the importance of prompt reporting. Now, within York region, we have many different community organizations and partnerships that we work with. So how do we actually determine whether a crime is anti-Semitic? One of the first primary areas that we look at is the victim-centered approach. Our approach to hate crime and hate crime investigations and hate crime prevention has to be victim-centered. It must be attentive to the victims. So it's not about what we perceive, whether it's a hate crime or not. It's about the victim's perception. Do they perceive that all of the elements of a hate crime were there? Do they feel that they were targeted because of authentic identity? We have a chaplaincy program with 10 chaplains, 2 of which are rabbis, and the rabbis assist us very much in trying to determine and understand all the complexities and the nuances of various cultural perspectives. We've worked for many years with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the B'nai B'rith, and previously the Canadian Jewish Congress. But in addition to that, we also work with reps from the Jewish community that serve on community advisory groups at the local level, as well as a regional level in York region, as well as ongoing training for members. Now, we also have the Criminal Code of Canada, which helps us define that. And there's a number of criteria that we would look to determine whether it's anti-Semitic.
There are really a lot of interesting points in what you're saying, and I think practical. One, listen to the victim, something that everybody should be hearing. And the other sort of interesting duality where you're saying on one hand, you really have to know the community on a micro, local level, but also be very aware of global trends that are affecting all those communities. So on that note of the sort of bigger picture global trends, I want to jump back to Mr. Masters, because recent years have seen a dramatic increase in online anti-Semitism. So on that front, what steps do you think can be taken at the local level to deal with a troubling, really global trend that has no borders?
Well, I think it is part of a larger trajectory. So you rightly identify the dramatic increase in online anti-Semitism, hate, and the fostering that has done. We have created a world that truly has no borders, and we often find that information flows faster than people. And that doesn't always benefit us when that information is hate-filled rhetoric and it involves threats and incidents. So what can be done at the local level? And I would mention that it is in the context of a general increase in anti-Semitism, not just in the online space, but in the physical space as well. And at the local level, we are seeing those professional security directors and those federations that Eric mentioned working ever more closely with state and local law enforcement. At the national level, here in the United States, SCN serves as the official liaison with the FBI, and we have identified really that the threat dynamic that we're living in is the most complex and dynamic one in the history of our country and ever to face the Jewish community because of the confluence of online threats and physical threats and the transmission between the two of those. Really, because so many of our institutions have been closed due to COVID-19 over the last year, we have averted a great number of physical threats, but it hasn't diminished what we're facing as a faith-based community or what any community is facing. And in many cases, it's exacerbated those threats. We're very focused on as institutions open up, how do we address that? The reality is we are not going to choose the time and place of the next incident, but we can choose our preparation. And when it comes to the online space, it is critically important that we stress that reporting mechanism. At the local level, at the national level, we're working ever more closely together to ensure that as incidents happen, we're reporting them. And when we see them, we are often seeing many of these groups, particularly the domestic violent extremist groups in the United States, they are undertaking coordinated campaigns in different cities. So while events may appear localized to a threat at one synagogue or one Sikh Gurdwara, when we put the intelligence together, we're seeing that those are happening in 5, 6, 7 cities around the United States, and it allows us to take a more coordinated approach. So absolutely on the reporting. Secondly, what's also critical is the empowerment piece. And the superintendent was mentioning a component of this, but really working together. We have to ensure that there are security strategies in place at the local level. We often hear, we know of no known direct credible threat. The unfortunate reality is that we often will not know about that threat till it's trying to walk into one of our synagogues or enter one of our Zoom meetings. And that means we have to be prepared and empowered. We have to create a strong and resilient community. And over the last several years, and thanks to increased attention led by JFNA through the federation system, supported by SCN and countless federations, we have seen increased investment and commitment to addressing those issues. And I believe that has increased the sense of preparedness and empowerment within our community so that people can be confident when they're taking their kids to a Jewish day school, when they're walking to shul on Shabbos, when they're going to make a decision of where they send their kids to camp, that we are creating a stronger, more empowered community that will be resilient in the face of online or physical threats. And that's really critical.
Yeah, well, to create an environment where people don't need to, as you say, fear basic things like taking their kids to school or going to pray. On the note of preparation, if we're to take that a step forward, Mayor Harmon, in addition to acting with law enforcement, as you talked about, in response to hate crimes, what do you think can be done to protect religious minority communities and then maybe a step further to promote tolerance?
Yeah, and I think this is a crucial question for mayors specifically, right? I think we play an outsized role. We have a lot of impact and influence in terms of setting the tone for what is acceptable in the kind of communities that we're creating. And so one of the things that we've done in San Luis Obispo is that we have a PACT program. It's PACT. It stands for Police and Community Together. We engaged with representatives of all of our communities of faith and in addition to other marginalized groups as well. We have a separate group actually that meets on a regular basis with representatives from all of these more marginalized groups that meets with our police chief on a regular basis so those relationships can be built. We have an individual officer on our team who is sort of assigned or the liaison to each one of these groups. So we have a specific officer in this case that is the liaison to the Jewish community. So that relationship can be strong so that they have a contact person in case anything comes up. That officer also will proactively reach out to the Jewish community if anything happens, not only here in our own community, but obviously with some of these bigger, more impactful acts of violence that have happened over the last few years, really checking in and making sure that everyone's feeling safe and secure, whether it's at the synagogue or at home or what have you. So I think all of those things have been really essential. But as I said, I feel like one of the opportunities and responsibilities that we have as mayors is to really be the tone setters, creating the culture of care in our communities and belonging, where everyone feels safe and supported. That's really important to me, that we are clear that violence, hate, dehumanizing actions will never be tolerated. And so maybe to that end, I'll read just part at least of my statement that I came out with after this incident at the fraternity here. So let me assure you that the San Luis Obispo Police Department is investigating this as a hate crime and will use every resource at our disposal to help bring these hate criminals to justice. This is a time for community policing as well. And if you have any information that could assist our police department in their investigation, I encourage you to come forward. And let me also assure you that the city will be working closely with Cal Poly University and other government and community partners to ensure that we provide for the safety and well-being for everyone here in San Luis Obispo, and in particular, community members who may be targets of hate and extremist groups. And as a city, we will continue to denounce acts like this as the hate crimes that they are. And as your mayor, I will continue to advocate for policies and practices that will transform San Luis Obispo to a community of belonging for all. And so it goes on from there, but I think that we have an opportunity, as I said, and I feel a really strong responsibility to be that person that takes a stance and makes a public statement, especially in the shadow of these types of hate crimes that happen in our communities.
Well, you just mentioned the importance, the role of the community itself and community policing in your experience. So let me ask Superintendent Veerapan, from your experience, why is community policing actually important? And do you have advice for other cities that might want to implement that approach or take it one step further?
Sure. With regards to community policing is a shared responsibility. We all, it should not only be members of the Jewish community that are offended when we have anti-Semitic hate crime. We should all be offended. Hate crime is a despicable offense. It's not only people of an identifiable group that are targeted that should be offended. Everyone, like I said, should be offended. We all have an important role to play. Relationship building is vital. Ultimately, the goal is to enhance the quality of life for all of us within our communities. The incredibly diverse community, that we have right here within York Region, which is considered one of Canada's most ethno-culturally diverse municipalities. Roughly 47% of the people living in this region identify as racialized and from born outside of Canada. It's critically important for us to ensure that we have programs and initiatives that really enhance the quality of life for everyone within the region. So it's about leveraging the profile, our policing profile, building on the historical and traditional roles of policing, where police have been seen as peacemakers and peacekeepers. But now we have the added responsibility of also being peace builders, which is a very, very different paradigm. So it's critically important in order for us to have safe, secure, welcoming, and inclusive communities, and where everyone can have a sense of belonging and feel that they can be contributing. Now, with regards to, I recognize that policing systems are different around the world. We're different here in York Region. And within our system, I can tell you some of the things that have worked for us. One of the things is we prosecute hate crime to the full extent of the law. We have no leniency on hate crime because, again, hate crime threatens the diversity and the fabric of our communities. So it's important to be strong on hate crime. We have a team of designated hate crime investigators. We hold regular meetings. We work closely with our Crown attorneys in the prosecution of hate crime. We engage our hate crime investigators in Yom HaShoah ceremonies. We've done that for a number of years. And we feel it's very, very important for officers to understand the impact that many members of the Jewish community and Jewish families have felt over the years as part of training. We host a reception with our Jewish community leaders at our police headquarters. We regularly give out letters of support for Jewish community organizations that are looking at security infrastructure grants, as well as vital and safer communities grants. We've recently built a human rights education classroom just to add to the component of early intervention and the importance of education as well in multicultural communities. And our human rights education classroom it's a location where we have roughly 40,000 children that'll visit here post-COVID and even pre-COVID. It's an early intervention approach and an investment in children and youth growing up in multicultural communities to utilize the lens of human rights, human responsibility, Indigenous education, and to inspire and empower generations through age-appropriate education in human rights, conflict resolution, peace building, and how to navigate global communities as they become future leaders and global citizens in York Region in this new millennium. So a number of different programs and initiatives, as I've mentioned. We also do places of worship tours. We've worked with the Tour of Humanity bus from the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. We've got members of the Jewish communities who are members of York Regional Police who help us understand the cultural competencies and the nuances and the languages. We've got rabbis that work as part of our chaplaincy program. We've done tours of the Holocaust Museum for our members, and we do general places of worship tours just to understand the broader complexities and the nuances of policing multicultural communities.
I think there's really a lot that other law enforcement agencies can learn from what that you guys there have been doing. Just as, part of what you're doing there, that list that you went through, really practical, really useful advice. And I just want to bring in one more issue that we haven't really talked about, which is funding, because like it or not, behind all of this, that is a necessary piece to make this work. So, Mr. Finkerhut, if we're talking about funding for the security of Jewish communities, should that be a key priority for local governments? I mean, how do the Jewish federations actually work with cities on that issue, and what more can they do?
Well, the answer, of course, is yes. But let me first, I want to thank the mayor and the superintendent for the very strong statements and leadership they clearly are demonstrating in their communities. And I also want them to know, I want all the mayors who are participating in this important conference to know that our communities are raising extensive amounts of private funds to build our infrastructure. You mentioned earlier, was mentioned about schools and that parents shouldn't have to worry about security coming to schools. Well, schools want to teach and they want to bring programs to students. They don't want to have to spend money on security, but they are. And camps and Jewish community centers and synagogues all are investing private funds, often led by the fundraising of the Jewish Community Federations. We estimate over $30 million is being raised and allocated locally by federations already today. And that number is surely going to double and triple in the coming years. But private funds can't do the job. Ultimately, it is the government's responsibility to keep us safe. And we understand that local funds are tight and that local governments are constrained. So one thing that the mayors on this conference can do is join with us, and many already have joined with us, in advocating at the state and the federal level for funds. We have a very important program that was created in the wake of 9/11 called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program in the federal government. This year, it was doubled from $90 to $180 million. If you go on our livesecure.org website, you'll see all the materials about how to apply for these funds. We need the mayors to help us tell their representatives and senators and tell their federal authorities, I'm sure it works the same way in Canada, that these funds are desperately needed. They are making the difference in physical security of every facility, the cameras, the security walls, all of the steps that are needed. And then, though they are not, they're not quite as capable financially as the federal government, state governments are also an important source of funding. To date, we have 11 states that have created security grant programs for the nonprofit and faith-based institutions, their community. I apologize, I don't know the number in the provinces in Canada, Superintendent, but this is an important source of funds. And once again, mayors are very organized and have a very strong voice with their state legislators and their governors, with their members of Congress and the president, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the other organizations. So this is a really important area for collaboration, because we cannot do this with private funds alone. This has to have the leadership of our government, of our level, all levels of government. And I'll just conclude by saying that, regrettably, this is not going to go away as a cost. It is a new added layer of costs for our communities, for our nonprofit sectors, for our faith-based institutions, our synagogues, all of our churches and mosques, and it is going to be permanent. If anything, it's going to go up. As Michael Masters talked about, the growing sophistication of the threats, and therefore the growing response is going to be needed. But we know it works. The training, the security cameras, the doors, all the steps that have been taken have saved lives. They've saved lives in synagogues, they've saved lives in churches, they've saved lives in mosques and in community centers of all kinds. And that's why we have to make sure that we have the resources needed. The Jewish federations will be there to advocate, will be there to raise private funds, and we need the partnership of all the mayors in this conference.
Right. Well, from what you say, maybe it's time to integrate funding as a really long-term part of the plan, long-term solution, and not something that sort of comes and goes and that local communities have to fight for anew each time. Thank you all so much. That was a really interesting exchange, a really, I think, useful and practical one, too. And as you've talked about, local legislation as well as security and law enforcement, and really community building and community policing, they're all integral components of that overall effort against anti-Semitism. Thanks so much for taking part.